So here lately, I've been learning a lot more about the Israelites in bondage in Egypt, the wilderness, and their promised land, and how it pertains to us in the faith today. And several of my last videos have had some of those concepts that I've been learning put into them. And in that, I just continue learning more. So I would like to give a tidbit on what God has been showing me pertaining Moses and that whole situation of what happened with him so far. There will probably be more later that God shows me, but I would like to at least share what I know so far and how it pertains to us in our spiritual lives. Okay, so first we see Moses is born into bondage, right? His people are in bondage. And in order to save him from that bondage, now I'm not saying go give your kids to the enemy, okay? But his mom had to literally pass him off to the enemy, their enemy, because it freed him from the bondage and kept him from the disaster that would have came upon, which was a move of God, okay? God intentionally had that for Moses, and we'll see why later on in his life. So Moses is raised by the enemy, living in the midst of his people's bondage, but not actually in bondage. He grows up, he sees the enemy, the Egyptians, beating one of the Israelites. And he defends the Israelite and kills the Egyptian. And he has to flee for his life out of Egypt. So it goes until it tells us later on he's 40 years old, tending to his father-in-law's sheep. And that's when the Lord beckons and calls him and to the burning bush, right? And that's when the Lord proceeds to tell him that he is to free the Israelites. Now, I always thought, Moses was in the wrong for killing the enemy, and I didn't know what else to think of it, right? But Moses was the one that wasn't in bondage, an Israelite not in bondage. He was raised by the enemy, but he did not agree with the enemy. Just because he was raised with it, he didn't have the enemy's mindset. Think of Satan. Think of a human being. They can be born watching other people, their people in bondage, their family, their friends, the community around them. And they can be raised by someone of the enemy. But it doesn't mean that they agree with the enemy. And they, when Moses killed the Egyptian, if you're thinking of it in spiritual terms of what we do with the enemy, he killed the enemy. He defeated the enemy, and he had to run for his life, because when you defeat the enemy comes back harder on you. Like all these people who are doing genuine deliverances, who are helping people come out of agreement with the enemy is attacking them harder in order to destroy them. So Moses had to run after defeating the enemy because the enemy wanted to then defeat him. And Moses was able to get away from it all. He got away from the bondage, and he was able to get away from the enemy. He was free from both. Then God waited for him to mature. That's the important part. God specifically waits for him to turn 40 years old. And then he calls Moses to go free the Israelites. Well, if you're thinking about that from a spiritual point of view of where we're at, somebody can be born watching the bondage around them of their people, right? Maybe being raised by someone that is the enemy, or working through the enemy, working through Satan, but they don't agree with the enemy's mindset, and they still have a compassion for their people that are in bondage. So they are able to step up and defeat the enemy, but they may have to, like, when the enemy comes after them, they may have to run because they're not strong enough to defeat all of the enemies, right? They were able to defeat one, they were able to defeat one demon, but they had to run in order for a small while to mature in faith, to grow in faith before they can go back and defeat the rest of the enemies. That is what God is doing right now with people. He has people who are coming out of bondage, coming out of and are not in agreement with the enemy, who have stepped forth and have defeated the enemy in some way, and then they're running, right? Otherwise Moses would have been destroyed if he had stayed there, because he wasn't mature enough. He wasn't where God needed him to be yet. And that's what other people would be right now. They're running because they're not mature enough to handle the stronger enemies, the stronger principalities, the stronger demons that would come after them. It would destroy them. And so then God's taking them out. God's taking time to mature them in faith, grow them in confidence, grow them in his strength, the reliance on him. And then he comes forward and he says, it's time to set your people free. Everyone thinks that the moment we come to salvation, we are set free from bondage, but that is not true, because you cannot be set free from bondage that you're agreeing with, or that you're in, or you cannot be set free from bondage that you're agreeing with, okay? And you cannot help others be set free from the bondage that you are still in. So the Israelites could not help one another get out of bondage because they were all in bondage together. But there are so many people that are agreeing with bondage right now that they can't go forth and help others get out of bondage because they're agreeing with the bondage. And so God is waiting for the people who are out of bondage and who are defeating the enemy to mature and grow in order to go back and help the others. And I'm seeing this right now with my personal family. Because we'll say I grew up in a very toxic family that was very abusive. There's a lot of bondage. The enemy was really involved. And that's exactly, like, God was showing me through my experiences right now of technically being the Moses, because I'm not in bondage and I'm not agreeing with the enemy. I've defeated the enemy in many different areas and I've come out from it. He's matured, he's grown me, and now he has me going back in to set them free. I had to step away for a while, and then I'm going back in to help set them free. And that's what you can be for your family if you're willing to go through suffering and hard times. It wasn't easy on Moses to fear for his life. It wasn't easy on Moses to do what he did. There had to be a little bit of suffering. There had to be some hardship. You can be that same person for your family if you're willing to go through it. But also know there are other people out there right now that God is doing the same thing with. And not everyone's agreeing with these people because they're still agreeing with the bondage. And when they're coming to be set free, okay, so the Israelites in the wilderness, they actually wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to go back to bondage. And Moses was angry with them. That's what people are doing right now also. They want to go back to bondage. They want to go back to their Egypt because it looks better than having to go through suffering to get to the promised land. They'd hate the suffering. And so they don't want to go through the wilderness, the suffering period, to get to the promised land where they could have the house, they could have the food, they could have everything without being slaves. But they didn't want to go through the hardship of the wilderness where they didn't think that food was going to be available. They didn't think water was available. They didn't have houses. And so they're like, we had it better in Egypt, better in slavery. And that's what people are doing. But there are also people who are being the Moses and who are leading them out and being forceful with them in order to do so. And just because you're not understanding what these people are doing, it doesn't mean that what they're doing isn't of God. If you go read how Moses treated the Israelites, he was forceful with him. He was angry because they kept trying to fall away from God. They kept disobeying God. He had the right to be angry. He didn't have the right to disobey God when he didn't speak to the rock and he struck it instead. But he had the right to be angry because they kept trying to walk away from God and they were complaining against God. So know that there are Moseses out there right now helping set people free. And there are the people who are the Israelites who are being set free, but are still complaining and wanting to go back to bondage or are still agreeing with the bondage. And you're seeing this go on into people right now. Spiritually, you're seeing what spiritually is going on in the physical in a different way. And it's not necessarily going to look pleasant, but it's necessary. Sometimes it's not going to look pleasant. Sometimes people might have to get a little angry. Sometimes people might have to get stern. It's not going to be pleasant, but it is necessary.